Let's talk about the Book of Deuteronomy. It's one of the most influential texts in the Hebrew Bible, absolutely foundational. And when you read it, you find this soaring, beautiful language about divine love and this special covenant, this sacred agreement between God and the people of Israel. But then, you also find these commands that, let's be honest, are pretty shocking to us today. We're talking about orders for total war, extreme social punishments. It creates this incredible tension. So the real question is, how can one single book be a source of both profound spiritual comfort and what looks a lot like brutal intolerance? That's the puzzle we're going to try and piece together. So, how are we going to tackle this? Well, we've got a clear path. First, we'll lay out what we mean by this Deuteronomic duality, that tension between blessing and destruction. Then, we're going to look at what some have called a code of cruelty head-on. After that, we'll bring in the missing piece of the puzzle, historical context. This will help us explore how divine love and harsh law might actually be reconciled within the book's own logic, especially its role in building a nation. And finally, we'll step back and ask, how do we even approach a text like this today without just slapping on a simple modern judgment? Okay, so let's start right there, at the very heart of Deuteronomy. Because what you find is this fundamental duality. On the one hand, you get this incredible vision of a unique relationship with God, a covenant just filled with promises of blessings. And on the other hand, you get these commands for exclusion and destruction that are, frankly, really hard to read. And this, right here, just lays it all out, doesn't it? It's a stark contrast. It forces you to ask a really profound question. How can a single, coherent work promise divine protection and love, while in the same breath commanding total war, stoning a rebellious son, and demanding the complete social exclusion of outsiders? I mean, this isn't some minor contradiction you can just gloss over. It's the central paradox that has challenged readers for thousands of years. To really get our heads around this, we can't just talk about it in the abstract. We've got to look at the text itself. So let's examine some of the specific commands that we, as modern readers, find the most ethically troubling. I think facing these passages directly is the only way to understand the true depth of the problem we're dealing with. Okay, so get this, a command to stone a rebellious son. To us, that sounds, well, it's just unimaginable, right? But to understand it, you have to put it in its ancient legal context. See, back then, the family unit wasn't just a private thing, it was the absolute bedrock of the state. Social order was everything. And a law like this, as harsh as it is, was seen as a powerful deterrent, something essential for holding the entire community's structure together and stopping a slide into total chaos. Now this command for total annihilation is probably the toughest passage to swallow. But from the author's point of view, this was framed as a matter of pure national survival. The fear, the absolute terror, was that any contact with the surrounding Canaanite cultures would lead to religious assimilation, to idolatry. And that would break the covenant, and in their worldview, lead to the complete collapse of the nation. It was a brutal strategy, for sure, but one aimed at political unity and religious purity. So when you put all these pieces together, you start to see a pattern, right? The draconian legal code wasn't just random cruelty. It was designed to enforce social norms. Those exclusionary policies weren't just simple xenophobia. They were tools to forge a distinct national identity in a world of other cultures. The theology of blessings versus curses, that was a powerful way to motivate people to comply. And underneath it all was this drive to centralize all religious and political power. Every single ethically challenging part of it served a specific, pragmatic purpose in this big project of building a nation. So how in the world do we make sense of this? Well, the real key, isn't to judge it from our 21st century perch. It's to contextualize it. To even begin to understand these commands, we have to try and step out of our modern ethical framework and into the incredibly volatile world of the ancient Near East. And this is a really, really critical distinction. The whole point of historical analysis is to understand the motivations and the pressures that shaped this text. That is fundamentally different from condoning or justifying the practices themselves. What we're doing here is building a framework for interpretation, not making an excuse. So this gives us a fantastic way to break this down. We can look at Deuteronomy through three connected lenses. First, there's the religious pressure to preserve this unique monotheistic faith. Second, the national struggle to create a distinct identity just to survive in a hostile world. And third, the political project of consolidating power to build a stable state. By using these lenses, we can start to see if the harsh laws and the loving covenant are really contradictions, or if maybe, they're two sides of the very same coin.
Okay, let's start with that religious lens. I mean, how could any of this severe stuff be seen as an act of divine love? To answer that, we have to grapple with an ancient idea of holiness that's pretty different from how we might think of it today.
You have to understand just how radical the idea of worshiping only one God was. It was a revolutionary, brand new concept, and it was constantly under threat in a world that was just filled with powerful, competing gods. This monotheistic imperative, as we're calling it, was a desperate struggle for survival. And from that perspective, extreme measures weren't just justified, they were seen as absolutely necessary to protect this fragile new faith from just being swallowed up and extinguished by the dominant cultures all around it. So within this kind of logic, things look very different. Holiness demanded purity, so those severe punishments, they were seen as necessary surgical purges, like removing a spiritual cancer that could threaten the whole community's relationship with God. The detailed curses weren't just threats, they were a teaching tool, a way to show the immense gravity of this covenant. And the jealousy of God wasn't like petty human envy. It was seen as a divine passion for an exclusive bond. The love was so profound that it demanded a radical protective separation from anything that could possibly compromise it. But this religious logic wasn't happening in some kind of bubble, right? It was deeply woven into the national and political realities of the time. The laws in Deuteronomy weren't just abstract ideas. They were intensely practical tools. They were designed for a very specific purpose, building and protecting the brand new nation of Israel in a very, very hostile world. And this table just lays it out so clearly. Look at this. For every single existential threat, Deuteronomy proposes a specific and pretty radical strategy. The threat of being culturally absorbed, ban intermarriage. The threat of political fragmentation, centralize all worship in one place. The threat of internal chaos, a severe legal code. You see, each harsh law is a direct answer to a perceived threat to national survival. And you can actually see this whole centralization thing play out over time. Before the monarchy, Israel was just this loose collection of tribes, each with its own local loyalties and shrines. Then, by mandating a single place of worship, Jerusalem, the monarchy could consolidate religious, economic, and political power. It was a brilliant political move. And this whole project really comes to a head in the 7th century BCE with King Josiah. His reforms were explicitly based on Deuteronomic principles, a desperate attempt to create a unified front against huge, looming empires like Assyria and Babylon. Okay, so after looking at the religious context, the national context, the political context, where does that leave us? You and me, as modern readers, trying to process this incredibly complex and often troubling text. I think reconciling these views means being able to hold two ideas in your head at once. For the authors of Deuteronomy, the severity was a kind of tough love. The harshness wasn't the opposite of God's care, but a necessary tool to protect it and ensure the nation could survive. For us, yeah, it's still ethically challenging, but we can understand why it was written, appreciating that for the Deuteronomist, the goal of a unified, holy nation justified these severe means. So at the end of the day, this kind of deep dive into context doesn't give the text a free pass, right? It certainly doesn't make those violent passages any easier to read. But what it does do is give us a much deeper, more nuanced understanding of a complex historical reality. It lets us see the text not as some timeless rule book that just fell from the sky, but as a document that was forged in the fire of its own very dangerous and difficult time. And that leaves us with this final vital question. This isn't just about Deuteronomy, really. It's about how we engage with all foundational documents from the ancient world, whether they're religious or secular. How do we draw wisdom and inspiration from them while also grappling honestly with the parts that deeply challenge our own ethical commitments? That question, well, that remains central to our ongoing conversation with the past.